Okay, hello everyone. We're going to get started, and I'll turn on my video for a moment. Hi, my name is Isaac Jabola-Krolis, and I am a fellow in the Writing Center here as part of the Writing Across Curriculum program. I'm pursuing my PhD in sociology at the Graduate Center right down the street. And along the way, I've taught several writing intensive courses at Lehman College. And now I will disappear again. I'm very excited to introduce the Writing Center's fall workshop for SLU SLU faculty, providing effective feedback on student writing. We did an in-person workshop last year, but we thought we'd experiment with a webinar this time in hopes of making the workshop more accessible. We do plan to offer more workshops in the future though, so please share any feedback you have after the session today. So with December upon us, we wanted to offer a workshop that could help you as you receive end of semester assignment submissions from your students. So hopefully some of the tips and tools in this session will help you in the short term. Others might come in handy in future semesters, especially our suggestions relating to assignments with revisions. We know your time is precious, so we'll keep this webinar relatively short, about 40 minutes. But I am more than happy to keep this conversation going in the coming weeks. My role in the Writing Center is to support you in weaving writing instruction best practices into your courses. So please feel free to reach out at any time. Let's start with the challenges we face. Giving students feedback on their writing. Here we go. Giving students feedback on their writing is hard. Giving anyone feedback on their writing is hard, for that matter. There are just so many words, so little time, so much that could be improved in many cases. Many of our students at CUNY struggle with writing at a college or graduate level, and some are still learning to write in English as an additional language. As for instructors, most of us were never really trained in how to respond to students' writing. I'm going to offer 5 tips based on guides from our Writing Center here and those at other universities. And I'll speak for about 15 minutes, and then we can have a short discussion. The first tip is this: to clarify your purpose. What kind of feedback do you need to give students for the assignment at hand? In my experience, it can be kind of easy to lose sight of your purpose, especially when reviewing students' work at a rapid pace or at tiring hours of the day. One basic distinction that is helpful, I think, is between formative and summative feedback. And this comes from the University of Michigan's Writing Center resources, which I'll draw from and link to more later. Formative feedback is intended to help students revise their work, typically before it's graded or for a lower stakes portion of a grade. So some of you might be requiring students to submit a draft of a paper in the next week or two, which they will then revise before submitting a final draft. You'll be providing formative feedback. You'll want to reinforce what students are doing well in their drafts, and then you'll want to make concrete recommendations for revision, or to raise questions that might help them rethink certain elements of their papers. Summative feedback, by contrast, evaluates the quality of a finished product. If your purpose is to provide this type of feedback, you'll place less emphasis on making actionable recommendations for revision. And instead, you'll focus more on articulating the strengths and weaknesses of the assignment submissions and on assigning a grade accordingly. Still, though, in this type of feedback, you can suggest areas where the student could improve in future writing. For instance, you might suggest that a student should work on the organization of their papers in the future, like focusing on one main idea in each paragraph. As instructors, we make mistakes when our purpose isn't clear. Sometimes we provide summative feedback when we should be providing formative feedback. We evaluate the quality of a draft without giving students clear recommendations for revision. Sometimes we get carried away and provide formative feedback or too much feedback on a finished product that students aren't going to revise. That's not a good use of our time, and that's confusing for students too. Other times we provide too little feedback on a finished product such that students don't understand the grade they received or how they could improve in the future. We can avoid these types of mistakes and others by clarifying our purpose when we respond to students' writing. My second tip is to limit your comments. When we provide students with feedback, a common tendency is to overdo it. We get carried away and provide too much feedback. We overwhelm students and make it hard for them to revise their work or grasp what they could have done differently. Responding to students' writing is very much an exercise in restraint. So here are a few strategies that can help you. First, try putting down your pen or taking your hands off the keyboard. Read the student paper or parts of it aloud without marking or commenting on it. This will help you keep from being pulled into too many sentence level issues so that you can attend to higher order concerns like organization, ideas, overall clarity. Second, write a general endnote or headnote, a note at the bottom or top of a student's paper that presents your core feedback. In this note, begin by addressing the writer by name, a nice thing to do. Then specify one thing the writer does well and or one non-judgmental descriptive observation. Then focus on just 2 or 3 areas, not more, for improvement, prioritizing higher order concerns, again, like organization and ideas, over lower order issues like sentence correctness, punctuation, spelling, etc. Finally, insert marginal comments selectively. In general, comments in the margins should explicitly connect to the core feedback that you present in your headnote or endnote. You want to avoid dangling general margin comments like unclear or vague. Those aren't effective in leading students to revision. So here's an example. Let's say you observe that a student doesn't present any evidence or examples in some of their essay's body paragraphs. Not an uncommon problem. In the margin next to those paragraphs, you could pose the question, what evidence could you use to support this point? Then, if you're providing formative feedback, in your core comments, you could suggest that the student should incorporate more evidence or examples from the course readings to support their main ideas, especially in the spots you marked with the margin note. If you're providing summative feedback, you could note that the lack of evidence or support made the paper less compelling. Feedback forms, like this one here, are one tool that can help you structure your core comments, especially if this concept is new to you or newish to you. These forms lay out explicit categories that force you to highlight both strengths and weaknesses in students' writing and higher order and lower order issues. You can use a template like this one in lieu of a free-form headnote or endnote. Students might also have an easier time processing your feedback in this format because they can see what they did well or what they need to work on, what higher order issues they're facing versus what lower order issues they're facing. I'll provide a link to this form after the webinar. Tip 3 is somewhat obvious, but easy to forget. Tone matters. How you express your ideas matters. Your words can motivate students to stick with it and strive for better, or your words can do the opposite. Obviously, it's not effective to only offer brusque, critical comments. Instead, cultivating a conversational tone and indicating that you understand and appreciate what your students attempted to accomplish whether or not they actually achieve their goals, can go a long way toward helping students accept your feedback instead of responding or reacting defensively. Small things also help and only take a few seconds, like addressing students by their name in your feedback, or by ending your comments with a brief encouraging note like "you got this" or something along those lines. Tip 4 is use a rubric. Rubrics are handy for both formative and summative feedback. When I use rubrics for formative feedback, I circle the appropriate box for each criteria instead of providing a numeric score. Rubrics are useful because they explicitly communicate the components of a successful assignment. I'll cite the Michigan Writing Center again. Well-developed rubrics allow you to avoid writing out the same comments over and over on multiple students' work, while also allowing you to mark each student's success in relationship to the assignment criteria quickly and then tailor any additional written comments to individual needs. So creating rubrics requires an investment of time up front, but using them ultimately saves time. I've certainly found that to be the case in my experience. The example here on the screen is a generic template that I made based on past rubrics I've used and an existing example. I tailor my rubrics to my assignments, but I always include most of the criteria here. I do try to avoid more than 6 criteria and 3 gradations so that it isn't too overwhelming to students. If I ever add assignment-specific criteria or rows, I sometimes fold some of these rows together, such as folding the introduction and conclusion criteria into organization, or the analysis criteria into use of evidence. This format you see here is only one type of rubric. Rubrics come in all shapes and sizes, and you can see other examples in the materials that we'll send out after this workshop. And now for our final tip of the day. If you teach relatively small classes, consider delivering feedback face-to-face, either in person or digitally. Why? Because you can speak more quickly than you can write, and because it provides your students with an immediate opportunity to ask you questions about your feedback, which reduces the likelihood that they'll misinterpret your comments. Face-to-face contact also helps with the tone issue. You deliver feedback in a more personal and conversational way. This approach can be especially useful for students who are English language learners, whom I'll say more about shortly. With regard to the digital option, there are now several programs that you can use to chat and share your screen at the same time, sort of like I'm doing now. So you can jointly walk through a student's paper while you talk. And of course, it can be more conversational than this is now. The types of options or platforms include Skype, Google Hangouts, Join.me, and Zoom, which is the program that we are using currently. And those are all free. We could devote an entire workshop to the specific question of how to provide feedback and grades to English language learners. And if you'd be interested in that sort of workshop, please do let us know. But for now, I'll just introduce you to a valuable resource and a few strategies. The Michigan Writing Center has compiled an excellent guide at this link on the screen. One takeaway is that for English language learners, it's even more important to use the best practices we've reviewed so far. And that means focus heavily on higher order concerns. Really try to engage the content of students' ideas and do your best to tap the meanings that they are trying to express. Don't mark every language use error. Make note of patterns and advise students to focus on 1 or 2 at a time. You can also provide students an error code sheet and then use shorthand codes to note language use errors if you're up for that. This approach of using an error sheet is most effective if you apply the approach consistently across assignments. Allow students to correct their errors even if there isn't a revision process built into your assignment. This is important, especially for self-motivated students who really do want to work on their English language skills if you give them a chance to. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, provide feedback orally whenever possible, just to facilitate communication, which can be difficult, and even more so for students who don't feel totally comfortable writing in English. One final note before I wrap up, and that is the work that students turn in can tell you something about the design of your assignment, what's working, what could be improved. For instance, if you're seeing students consistently neglecting part of your assignment prompt, which has happened to me many times, you might need to tweak your assignment or assignment instructions next time. Similarly, if you aren't currently providing students an opportunity for revision, perhaps you'd consider doing so in the future. How pleased I would be. I can help you with assignment design, so do please reach out. So to recap, here are 5 tips I've offered to help you review and respond to students' writing assignments. Clarify your purpose, limit your feedback, tone matters, use a rubric, and consider feedback face-to-face, delivering feedback face-to-face. I could have shared a dozen more strategies, but for an introduction to this topic, I wanted to focus on a handful that we in the Writing Center see as especially useful. You can find several more tips and tools at these links. The first is a 2-page sheet on our Writing Center website. The sheet includes some of the tips I've shared plus others. The second is the University of Michigan Writing Center site that I referred to earlier. It provides, or it addresses this issue, or this task of responding to student writing in greater depth and with examples. I'll share these links and others, including this PowerPoint, in an email after this webinar. Most importantly, though, let me reiterate that I can be your go-to resource for this and any other aspects of writing instruction. Whenever you have a question or need some input, just shoot an email to the Writing Center email address here on the screen. If you need a specific resource, I can try to provide it to you. If you want to talk through a more general challenge or idea, I can do that too. Recently, for instance, I set up a phone call with a faculty member who wanted to conduct a peer review session in his class in which students review each other's writing, but he didn't know where to start, so we worked on a plan, and I'm happy to do the same with you. That concludes the material that I had planned for the webinar. Thank you very much for listening, and please do get in touch. And have a nice night. Bye-bye.